nobody can argue that a group of regular people picked randomly is somehow like not able to come up with better answers than our politicians can.
So you see a mechanism by which American democracy
Absolutely, yes. It can be effective.
Solve
yes, absolutely.
Climate change.
Absolutely.
I don't
yes.
think democracy exists today in this country.
A lot of people look at XR, look at our image in the media, and they think that we're anarchists or communists or socialists. Can you guys describe your ideology a little bit and maybe what Extinction Rebellion is working toward? What's the solution?
I'm very surprised that people would think that of XR, because that's nowhere near XR's platforms. Like, I mean, a lot of organizations are out there saying tax the rich. We don't even say that, right? So I don't know where you get that idea, where people would get that idea that we are socialists. Like, where we say is that we don't know the solution. We have these very specific demands, which are like very broad and general. Like, no one could disagree with them almost. Like, tell the truth. That the fact that you have to even demand that is absurd to me. But so what we say, we don't know the solution. And if we knew the solution, people would not accept our solution. Like a top-down imposed solution in this country would just never be accepted. Just see what's happening in upstate New York about like solar farms and all that, right? So what our solution is citizens' assemblies, which is essentially like a jury system for policy. So we bring everyday citizens together in a representative manner, like representing all races, genders in the proportionate manner, and bring experts to them, and then we discuss an issue, right? So the experts give people the information, and everyday citizens come up with solutions. So this, not only do you get better solutions because it comes from people, you get better acceptance. So that's our...
And there are real life examples of where citizens' assemblies have been effective, correct?
Yeah, I mean, every once in a while, the political system just isn't set up to deal with something that people really want to fix. For example, there was a crisis in Ireland where the government was sort of under the thumb of the church, but their banning of abortion had created a really terrible kind of set of social problems. And people wanted to break out of that, but the political system simply couldn't. So they called for a citizens' assembly, and they were able to have essentially a plebiscite that was run by communities who came together with facilitated conversations, weighing the pros and cons, and it didn't have to be politicians worried about what's going to happen if they lose like support of other dominant institutions. And if your diagnosis of the problem is that the political system itself is incapable of solving it, and climate is another good example, because getting out of this mess is going to require a lot of sacrifices. Yeah. No politician wants to be responsible for the sacrifices, even if what comes off the back of it is everyone benefits.
Yeah.
So what you need is something that is not victim of all of the dysfunctions of our current political structures. And nobody can argue that a group of regular people picked randomly is somehow like not able to come up with better answers than our politicians can.
Maybe folks from outside of XR want to weigh in. Julian,
I
you
could
look
argue that. I think that if the goal is climate change, it's almost a distraction to start worrying about the methods that we're using to organize ourselves as a society or a culture. And that maybe if we were to stay focused on what the real problem was that we're confronting, which I look at as a very technical issue having to do with how we are using the Earth's resources and how that's coming back to bite us, because the Earth is this ecosystem that works in a particular way, and we're putting our thumb on the scale in a very big way, that while it's possible that our political systems are influencing that, it's just as possible that we can use the systems that we have to address that technical solution. So I don't actually see the climate crisis as a direct and necessary end of the political system that we have. Not that citizen assemblies can't work. But the concept of the citizen assembly is really what started this country. And there was a lot of effort that went into establishing American democracy, as imperfect as it is. It's not perfect, but it does have within it a tremendous capacity for change, and it may not be as sweeping and as comprehensive as we want it to be, but we've got to keep working at it little by little, and that's how these big problems get solved. I think that trying to solve big problems in huge sweeps creates a lot of agony as well, and it's a little bit hubristic for us to think that we can do that better than the politicians. I mean, we've got a system that kind of does work and has changed over the years, even if it's not within any of our individual lifetimes.
So you see a mechanism by which American democracy
Absolutely, yes. It
could,
can be
could
effective.
solve
Yes, absolutely.
climate change.
Absolutely.
Would
yes.
that apply to every other nation? Because climate change is a global issue.
So different nations have different systems, and they have very different cultures. We are like a very polyglot culture in the United States, and there's many different backgrounds that have many different voices, and whether they are, recent immigrants or
people whose ancestors built this country and turned the soil over
whether they
for all
are
the
the
institutions
descendants
that built the White
whether,
House
whether
and the
they are the
Capitol building.
descendants of
Right.
slaves.
Right.
That we have, we've got a lot of baggage, but we also have a lot of possibility within the system. And I think it might be a little bit of a mistake to think that American democracy didn't have some role in the prosecution of the Civil War and the eventual triumph.
But it needed a bit of help from civil disobedience, right?
Yeah, I'm not denying the necessity of civil disobedience, but it's not sufficient on its own.
But I think things have practically probably gotten worse since the civil rights movement. The influence of money in this democracy.
There are definitely aspects that have gotten worse.
I don't
yes.
think democracy exists today in this country.
Oh, I think that's
Unless you just define democracy by casting a vote.
I think that this country is now works in the best interests of our corporations rather than our citizens.
For sure, there is a real issue with the personhood of a corporation, and there's a real issue with how we look at corporations, for sure. But that I don't think was anticipated, and I don't think we've incorporated it sufficiently or enough right now in the political system. Yeah, you're right. That's true.
Well, I think anyone who's trying to use disruption and to build a movement of essentially non-cooperation in order to influence our society to change a major public policy has to have a process to getting an answer. And if they come to that with saying, we want things to be done this way, it's actually undemocratic, as in
A technical solution
we,
that you just impose.
A pro-climate movement that is willing to break laws and to force the powers that be to change because there's no other way to do it. Power concedes nothing without a demand. You have to force it to happen. At that moment, the answer, at least from my perspective, should be that we got here because actually there were gaps in our democracy, that it was not a majoritarian system, that it wasn't helping save us and protect us, that the government wasn't doing its mandate, but that it had been captured all along. And what we're saying is to break out of that, there needs to be a fair thing that we can all agree, yes, that can't possibly be corrupt. And it's really just a check. We're not saying take down the whole government, but we're saying when we hit this wall, when we have to step out of this rut that we're in, there needs to be an extremely fair, extremely democratic way to get out of it, to redefine what went wrong and fix it.
But I think a big part of what went wrong is the corporation, for example, the oil corporations understood the problem of climate change and have for a long time. And there was this huge delta of understanding between normal people who did have the power to change things, who did not understand it. And that is on us as individuals to have either ignored or not paid attention. I know that like some people think that that's part of a plot by the corporations to have done that. But I do think that it's important that we all understand.
You doubt that corporations, fossil fuel corporations didn't actively work towards misinforming people about the impact of fossil fuels?
I don't doubt that, but I do think that ultimately the responsibility comes down to the individuals. And that's the nature of democracy. It's the responsibility of the individuals to exert their influence.
To be not subject to the fossil fuel money-funded propaganda.
No,
That's
you're
the fault
subject-
of the
you're subject to
individuals,
that, but
they already knew this
You're
was
subject
bad.
to that, but you are expected to be a critical thinker and an engaged citizen, and that is how democracy works.
In the face of a blizzard of propaganda,
Yes, it's
driven by
it's
huge
very
amount of money.
difficult. It's very difficult. It's like facing the king, but that's what you have to do.
Well, you know what, as an American person who understands my civic duties and my civil rights and civic rights and responsibilities, not every American has that same power and that same influence. When you say that's what should be, that is the ideal, but it's not the reality. Because when we look at who really has a say and who's going to say what they want to say to keep their comfort zone or to not rock the boat, as opposed to the person who's like, I'm going to keep rocking this boat, but then they face retaliation in their community, on their job. The reality is that not everybody has the same Americanness, democracy, civil rights, and opportunities. So we have to be realistic about that. That's why we have environmental justice communities. You can't fight what I'm saying, because that would mean that you just totally negated the fact that there are EJ communities all over this country that are created and exist because of the historical disparities that continue until today. So let's be real. Let's talk about what's true.
Let's wrap up by reframing the discussion. How, as it is today, how can and should American democracy reform itself to make it so that the fossil fuel industry's voice is not as powerful as it is?
Well, I guess the question of whether democracy can reform itself is a difficult one. I think maybe going back to what you said about bringing sugar to a neighbor is relevant. I think a lot of it has to start with listening, conversations like this. I think there's larger reforms that need to happen, like getting corporations out of political speech. I think there's a whole slew of reforms that need to be made, but I think we're in a very difficult spot right now. I wish I had an answer or a silver
start
bullet,
with the
but yeah.
depersonification of corporations.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
Well, I just wanted to say, I mean, when we look at empires throughout history, I think all of them have been built with bloodshed and built on the backs of the oppressed.
Not all. A lot of them built by women weren't, but go ahead.
Okay, yeah. And also built, through exploitation of natural resources. So when we're talking about solutions and a new way, I think that the challenge is to envision something different than anything that's been done before. Any of these huge empires that have existed and been built through exploitation and violence, now we're at a place where we have to be so imaginative and create a new reality that has never really been done before. So yeah, it's going to look really, really different from anything we can really imagine.
I think that's the opportunity of the moment now. I think you put it so well, which is we have an opportunity to reimagine everything that we do and every way that we operate in all of our systems. How we enact that is another question, I think. But we first have to start with the vision of it. We have to start with the creativity of it.